All right, so I'm going to go ahead and start. I'm B.A. Harrington. I am an assistant professor of woodworking at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. I've just finished my second year teaching there. And I have inherited a pretty cool program that we refer to as HarvestToUse. In your registration package, you got the newest version of Wood Miser's magazine. And this is actually us on the cover. It's our shop tech, Joe Lewandowski, running our F-140. 140, is it? Which is the same Wood Miser they had out there this morning demonstrating. And there's a sweet little article in here that Joe wrote about that experience. It's a little idealistic. I think you'll know what I mean when you read it. Some of the things he talks about in here haven't actually quite been realized, are things that we hope to. So basically, this is not really about implementing HarvestToUse in a woodworking curriculum for the sake of like explaining to other people how to do it. It's more the story of what I have discovered is in place at, or was in place at IUP, and the way we're trying to continue it and revive it. So Indiana University of Pennsylvania, which gets a little bit confusing, there is also a California University of Pennsylvania, is part of a 14-school consortium that used to be all teacher colleges. Now they're small state universities, so IUP is about 14,000 students, which pretty much doubles the population of Indiana, Pennsylvania, which is a rural town nestled in the beautiful foothills of the Allegheny Mountains. We are part of Appalachia. We're about 70 miles northeast of Pittsburgh. Let's see, we are a woodworking program that is in an art department. We're very material focused, so we're not exactly furniture design, we're woodworking. I mean, this woodworking is taught, furniture is taught in very different settings around the country, depending on what school you're at and what department you're in. And then the art department at IUP is actually in the College of Fine Arts, along with music and theater. So that's just a little bit about the school. And now I'll just move on here. So, what happened? Wow.
It's an awesome projector, isn't it?
The last presentation I saw in here, I thought that was intentional. that he was pinking everything in Detroit that had been made from salvaged wood, but I wondered why the people's faces were pink. Okay.
So that's probably orange, right?
So yeah, but this is a good idea, Todd. Maybe we should paint ours, powder coat ours purple. Anyway. So IUP has one of the Wood Misers, the F-140, that is out. Is it still out on the lawn? Okay, that was demonstrated this morning. And I have to thank them because Wood Miser is here sponsoring this presentation, and once they got wind of the fact that I was doing this and talking about it and stuff, they agreed to be one of the sponsors for the conference. So we definitely have to thank them.
Is this their top end machine or something?
There's a higher, there's one up from this. Yeah. So basically the HarvestToUse idea is, going from a tree like this, slotted to be removed, to the capacity to mill it up on campus into lumber to store and dry and make things out of, right? So that's the idea of HarvestToUse. Little bit of history of it is that, so as I said, I've been there, I just finished my second year there. So in 2004, Chris Weiland, who taught at IUP for 31 years, he and Steve Lohr, who's a well-known in the turning community, turning cult within furniture making or woodworking, Steve had taught at RIT, had retired from there, and they put their heads together around the idea of developing a woodworking program in a university that was very focused on the idea of turning. So in 2004, they created a center on the IUP campus called the Center for Turning and Furniture Design. Now basically, I'm still trying to get my head around what it means to be a center, but for the most part, it means you can get funding outside of the university and spend it in ways that aren't as restricted by the normal rules of the university and how money gets spent and acquired. So the purchase of the Wood-Mizer sawmill was really the beginning of a Harvest to Use program and the center, the establishment of the center. And we have to thank the anonymous donor that many of our programs have benefited and still benefit from. And if you don't know who I'm talking about, ask me later and I'll fill you in. Because they continue to support woodworking programs around the country, and we are continuing to benefit. And then we have an artist in residency program, like several of the other schools, that's funded through them. We can support some of our grad students through funding from them. I think Todd, my grad student here, and I are both here in part through funding that came from the, travel money and stuff. So, and then a few of the important dates between the initiation of this and the purchase of the mill and now. So another thing that happened in 2006, there was a residential revival on the campus, which basically is a pretty name for tearing down a bunch of old dorms, very controversial, and putting up new ones that are not very high quality, but anyway, so that happened, and the Woodworking Center became part of that and got incorporated into the Harvest to Use idea. And then in 2007, the Lively Arts, which is the Performing Arts Center on campus, actually commissioned the woodworking area to do a bench, to design and build benches for a new space that they built. And the Wood-Mizer played an important role in that. And then finally in 2009, a drying shed, a site was established to keep the Wood-Mizer on permanently and do milling there, and a drying shed was built. And I say finally because that was like a 3-year process. We are a state school. And Pennsylvania must have some of the craziest bureaucracy of any of the states. I've been in a lot of state programs and I've never encountered such difficulty. But anyway, most of us know about that stuff. And then 2012, that fall when I arrived, just the idea of trying to reinvigorate that whole program, and for me, a big part of that has been figuring out who on campus to make friends with. And then 2013, last summer, more construction sites for new buildings on campus, and the emerald ash borer. So more trees came down because of that. So I'll just sort of go through this. So the residential revival that I mentioned in 2006, basically a bunch of dorms were demolished. So the one on the left is one that got demolished, and then new dorms built similar to the one that you see in the background there. So by this time, salvaging and stuff had become very trendy, but for some reason, it did not happen here. They kept asking about trying to, because there was a lot of really good material, and we've heard some, like the presentation on the salvaging of building materials in Detroit was amazing, but there were all these solid core poplar doors throughout those dorms. We still have a bunch of them, maybe like 20 of them left. We've used them for tons of stuff. We use them for jigs and fences and stuff, and try to design some stuff too with them. But apparently what happened was there was an 8-hour period on a Sunday right? So that it didn't draw a lot of publicity, where the woodworking area, the professor and students were allowed to go in and salvage what they could. But there was this kind of thing constantly, and it all just went in the dumpster. But what they were able to do is design and make a bunch of these little boxes. So you can see the mitered boxes are out of those solid core poplar doors. The 4 squares of oak came from lumber that was felled on campus and milled up. We have a laser engraver, and these residential revivals, these were the little donor gifts that were given to people who had given money for the residential revival project. Just showed the box, them being CNC'd. I don't know how many of them were made, but quite a few, and we still have several of them kicking around.
Who got them, like builders?
Donors, yeah, people who had given money for the residential revival project. And so then they asked the center to design and make a little gift that they could give out to people. So along with that little bit of salvaging that got to happen, building that, a lot of trees came down. So the dorms were demolished, a lot of trees came down to make room for the new dorms that were built. So there was a ton of milling that happened, and we still have a lot of wood left from this milling. A lot of pin oak, which is not real nice oak, actually. There's a lot of waste in it. A lot of times over half the board is firewood, probably. But we've managed to figure out ways to use that. But this just shows, I mean, you can see, all the sawdust. So it was just log after log after log that they processed. I'm not sure what this lumber was used for, so we probably actually still have some of this in the drying shed as well.
So who did the building? That's students?
Chris Weiland, the gentleman that I told you taught there for
Faculty?
31 years, faculty, art department, shop techs, and students. So then, I think this was 2007 then. Well, not actually, I'm jumping ahead of myself. One of the things on the IUP campus, one of the things that it's known for is this infamous oak grove. So a lot of special things take place in the oak grove, and it's basically a little courtyard on campus. And we also, the Allegheny Arboretum was developed as a private institution, but that has a relationship with the campus. And every tree on the IUP campus is part of the Allegheny Arboretum. And that also is helpful because they are a separate nonprofit group that can raise funds and do projects and stuff. So we maintain a relationship with them. But so in 2007, the building on the left is Fisher Auditorium, which is our performing arts center. And the building that you can see in the foreground on the right here then is the theater building where the classes happen. There's a small student theater in there. There's a wood shop in there for set design and all that stuff. Well, then they decided to build in what used to be an open passageway, this building that connected the two. It acts as basically gives them more room when they're having events to let people in, to help move the flow of traffic in. The box office is now in there. There are other conference rooms and event rooms in there. So that was designed, and right out in front of it, so you can see like the corner of the building. So basically right out in front of this new curved building was this large pin oak that suddenly was deemed a diseased tree that needed to come down. So And that idea is kind of controversial. A lot of people wonder whether the tree was actually diseased or whether the roots were in the way of piping that needed to go in. Anyway, but it was determined that the tree was diseased and needed to come down. So that's when the Lively Arts commissioned this bench then to be built from that tree, and it's become quite an infamous pin oak tree, and I think we just have a little bit of wood left from that. But so here is Chris Weiland, the gentleman in the tan jacket coat, and then Tony Neese, and what on here is this purple jacket. Tony is the head of grounds, and he has become one of those really good friends of mine that helps us get trees and fills me in on, who I need to know and who I need to ask stuff. So this is marking up that tree. Chris being fitted to go up in the lift so that he could mark further up. So he actually got to mark how he wanted the tree cut, right? All the way up there. And then they actually, that's the lift, but that also shows you where they brought the wood miser actually into the oak grove through here. I'm pretty sure it happened during a summer, though. So they're starting to cut the tree down. Logs. And then the bench. So the bench was designed by Chris, and then built with the help of students' labor and now there are several of these in that new, in this new building. And we also have one of them down in the outside of the wood shop in the art department. So also then from that pin oak, and you can't see the writing on here, but basically they took a slice of it. I can't remember what it was soaked in. Right? Yeah, something. So soaked in that, then they mounted it. It's on the wall outside of the art department. So it's pointing to all the growth rings and telling you when the oak started. I can't remember what the date is, and actually you can't see very well. But then it's got all various dates pointing to growth rings, and telling what would have happened then. Significant moments in American history, in Western Pennsylvania history. The Johnstown floods are on there. Anyway, just so using that as an educational thing. Then finally, I think I said 2009, on South Campus, they actually finally got to build the drying shed. And this was like 3 years of getting through the right approval for both the site and the building. And they're still all sort of nervous that it will someday be taken away from us, like that facilities or the state will decide they need the building for something and throw all of our wood out and use it for something else, because we actually don't own it. And that is also why it took so long to get through all the red tape and everything that was needed for the approval. So every time I bring up the idea of building a solar kiln, I get reminded of how long it took to get this. But I don't know. I tend to not be stopped by those things. I still want to pursue a solar kiln, because right now we're just air drying everything.
You mean we, the university, don't own it, or we, the department?
We, the department.
Oh, okay. But the school
Yeah.
does.
The school owns it. The state.
Property.
The state.
All right.
Yeah. I mean, those of you who teach or are associated with state institutions understand that sort of, it's not really yours, it's the state, but yeah. It's actually a really nice location. It's right by one of the main entrances to the university and by the university sign, and it's right next to the facilities building. So here, what they did was, it was Chris Weiland's last class, basically, that he taught at IUP, I'm pretty sure, and as a summer class, special topics in woodworking on architecture. Chris and 6 students then built the drying shed. Here's showing you laying up the walls in the wood shop. And another little tidbit, the idea of becoming really focused on turning never really came to fruition, but we do have an amazing turning studio, and we have like 8 one-way lathes. So it still is my goal to become the place to do turning. But we are going to change our name, and as I said, what did I say to them when I was pushing for changing the name, is that it's kind of like trying to develop a whole woodworking program around the idea of turning is like developing a ceramics program around the idea of raku firing or something, right? So I think turning is great, and we have all these lathes. I need to become a turner. I don't think I'll join the cult of turning, but yeah, so that shift is happening, and we're moving more into becoming really a material-focused program that's all about wood. So the name will probably just be the Center for Wood at IUP. And we'll push more the idea of turning as a big part of that, and we feature turning. But it's really about wood as a material and an expressive material, and thinking, learning to think and express oneself with that specific material. So here's just building that shed. And other than the concrete slab and the roof, pretty much the shed was built with salvaged material, siding that was left over from some other project. So that idea of HarvestToUse, being able to harvest trees from campus and then use those in projects, as well as the sustainable idea of salvaging and recycling wherever possible. So when I got there, not much had happened for a few years since Chris had retired. The Wood Miser had been fired up a couple of times, but not a whole lot had happened. And one thing that had happened is the site had kind of become a dumping ground for any wood debris and logs. So there was just a massive pile of logs, and logs that had been sitting around for a long time that weren't really good for milling up for lumber anymore. So we started having to clear some of those away just so we could even get something up on that. Actually, I'll go back to that now. And that's when I started understanding this idea of how important it is to make friends and make the right friends. And I don't mean that in an insincere way either. I mean, I truly, you find out who you need to talk to get the yes that you want to do the thing you want to do, like acquire the ash logs that you've happened to find out in a conversation are gonna have to come down because of the emerald ash borer. So find out who you can get the answer yes to the question, can we get those logs? But also, I mean, that's really important for all kinds of reasons within community. So becoming friends with those people, but also I genuinely take an interest in what these people do. You know, I find out about their job. I find out about, like Tony Neese, who's the grounds person. He loves the trees on IUP campus, and he does whatever he can. He fights to keep those trees standing, even during the design process for new construction and stuff. And he's, so it was a conversation that I had with him when the idea of those ash logs came up, and his first question to me was, BA, why do you want those ash logs? You've got more logs than you need. You know, that the site's a mess. No, you know, if I tell them that you want those ash logs, they're gonna ask me, why do you want anything more when you know you haven't even used up what you have? So that started this conversation about how most of those logs aren't really good for the lumber that we need anymore. So in the end, what happened was Tony And his facilities crew ended up cleaning the whole site up for us and getting rid of all those old logs, taking them to the dump. But it took me, having a conversation with the right person, figuring out what their interests are, what their concerns are. Their main concerns are safety on the campus. But anyway, in the end, not only did they clean up that site for us, and it's still hard to me that we let all those logs. I'm a hoarder. Steve Lohr is a hoarder. I could tell you more stories about that. But and I thought, wow, we could use these for training ourselves to use chainsaws, because you do need to do some chainsaw work. But anyway, we just decided we let them all go, and now we have about 12 or 14 new logs, including from the ash trees, and then more. There's more construction going on campus, so we got those. And what ended up happening was they just arranged for the contractors to bring the logs right to our site, so we didn't even have to spend more money and hire. In the past, sometimes the Wood Center has actually had to hire people to get the logs from a certain site on campus to the space. So what I did right away was, start firing up that machine as soon as I could and getting the classes down there so that the students could see this thing in action. They were already starting to use some of the wood that had been milled up in the past, but I think it's a really important thing for them to be able to see and experience the whole, and they were in there doing every part of it. So how many people saw the Wood Miser demonstrated this morning or have seen one? I wish I could say it, it's more of a feat than it is to be able to operate one of those. It's not. It's really pretty simple to do the cutting. The trickiest part is actually getting used to the hydraulics. So ours has hydraulics, and basically you get the log rolled up onto these arms, and then with hydraulics you get it up, and you can turn it and maneuver it into place. Right, so you can see the little teeth on that arm, right, helps you move the log. And there's a little bit of trimming that has to happen depending on what you're going to end up doing with the log, how you're going to mill it up. But often the logs are a little bit too wide, right? So you've got to do some trimming before you can actually start milling. So this is Chris Weiland. The first time we fired it up, I'm fortunate enough to still have him around, and he wants to stay very involved. He cares very much about this program, and especially the HarvestToUse thing, which he started. So he came in, started training me, and ran all the classes the first fall I was there through the operations of this machine, so everyone got to see logs being milled. Right, and you always get certain students who are very involved from the get-go, right? So Josh was incredibly concerned about every aspect of this. Right, and basically you set it for the thickness that you want to do, and then start milling. And to me, this is very much an educational opportunity. So you're not just milling the logs, but then you're looking at the lumber, talking about the grain, talking about all the different things around this tree to lumber cycle, and using every educational opportunity you can, basically. So here was my first run. It is pretty loud. And fun things like after we got down a couple of boards, we uncovered an ant nest in the log. So then, suddenly little ants were crawling out. And I don't know about you guys, but I never tire of seeing those quarter sawn oak rays suddenly. And it is a pretty spectacular experience for the students to be able to witness this and to participate in, every aspect of it. And to suddenly see the log opened up and see this grain. And then we actually got the students on it right away. And two, just that process of them taking the logs, moving them over, stacking them up, restacking them the way they came. I mean, it's such a experiential way of learning and really absorbing this whole process. Again, just right, and then finish stacks. Most of the lumber that we were milling up initially it's not great stuff, right? These logs have been sitting out there for years in the elements, so it really was mostly just to get the thing fired up again and go through the process and get some training. So we actually just left these stacked outside. But it is very cool for the students to be able to see this and experience this. And then a lot of sawdust is created, right? And the ceramic students, some of them, right, were like, okay, great, we're doing a raku firing. So they gathered up all the sawdust for our art building our art department is in 2 different buildings now after renovations, and we have the privilege, the wood area has almost the entire basement. With the addition of Steve Lohr's 3D design class, we take up almost the entire basement of the art building. We have lots of space, which is really nice to have. But the compromise for that was that ceramics and sculpture were moved to another building. So it's not ideal to have them detached from us. It's about a 10-minute walk. But the wood miser and our milling site is over by that building. So that also helps keep us connected. And then whenever we're doing one of these mills, we let everyone know and they come out. So the ceramics students came and gathered up that for raku firing. So just what I'm trying to do with this program that I inherited, which I'm very excited about, is actually, as much as I can, incorporate it into the basic curriculum, starting right away with the intro level classes, so that it's not just this separate thing that we can do whenever something comes up like the Lively Arts Bench Commission, but that it's happening all the time on a regular basis. The students are incorporating it into their general thinking about wood as a material and the processing and how we end up with the lumber. One of the things in the world we're in today is we're often very detached from the things that we consume, right? Even with our food, we're often very detached from where it actually comes from. So, not surprising that we now have all these grassroots movements going on of food to table and all that. And I think this is really part of that. And it fit in so well then with the theme of the conference and that idea of rootedness and regionalism and thinking about the place you're working within. And also this is a way for us to reach out to the broader campus and to the community of Indiana. And hopefully, eventually, we'll be able to allow people from the community to bring in logs, from trees that end up going down in a storm on their property, and we'll be able to mill them up, and the community will get more involved. And another exciting thing that's happening is a bunch of faculty from different departments got together in the last couple of years and have come up with an idea for a minor in sustainability studies, which there are a few different campuses around the country. I can't remember who we're modeling this around, but so that's on the books now, and it seems like it's really going to go through, that we will offer a minor in sustainability studies, and we, the Wood Center, along with the Wood Miser and our Harvest to Use program, are hoping to be able to be one of the key players in that minor, which also helps to bring other, everyone's always concerned in their departments about enrollment, and we have had dwindling enrollment in the art department. So this will also be an opportunity to get more students maybe adding art as a minor, or at least coming in and taking our classes. So one of the ways that I do this, starting with the intro students, the first project I give them is a bandsaw box from a small block of basswood. So they all get a block of basswood that's 12 inches long, 7 inches wide, and 4 inches thick. So, and they all get that same size block, and everyone designs and makes a bandsaw box. And one of the parameters of the assignment is that the final box has to somehow reflect those original dimensions. So somewhere in the shape of the box, it still has to be 12 inches long. It still has to be 7 inches wide and 4 inches. And one of the reasons I do that is because it makes for a really nice display, a really nice cohesive display of these boxes afterwards that all reflect this original size. But in that assignment is all about learning about the material properties and characteristics of wood. So it's all about wood grain, looking at face grain, edge grain, end grain, and seeing how the pattern on the end relates, of the growth rings relates to what you're seeing on the face, and then what happens when you cut into that, how the grain shifts. But then also learning about what counts as a glue surface, right? And that end grain doesn't have integrity as a glue surface, and the bandsaw box is great for that, right? Because they have to cut in such a way that they don't have end grain to glue back together. So it's really all about this being able to think with the wood, design around the properties of it. And then the way they do the box, it's a subtractive project. So they start out with that original block of wood and put it back together, and it retains the integrity of the original block they started with in terms of the grain. So I from the get-go, I start talking about that by showing them, actually not people from the woodworking or furniture world, but sculptors who actually think about the grain in this way. So this is Giuseppe Pannoni. He's most famous from this photograph he did in the 70s, I think, which some of you would probably recognize, where he made contact lenses. It's a really, really creepy photograph. Anyway, but so that's what he's most known for. But he's a sculptor, and he's done this series many times, The Hidden Life Within, where he excavates a log down to the original sapling that was growing, which I think is amazing stuff. So anyway, I show them this, and I'm talking about the grain and the integrity of the grain. That's just a little detail of how he gets down to that sapling. People like David Nash, another sculptor who uses the idea of wood and wood grain in a very different way. I kind of feel like we as woodworkers could never get away with making this stuff, right? Because we know, we couldn't just put this out there as a sculpture or an art, because it's I don't know, we have, people who don't use the material to build furniture with have a different relationship to the grain, and I'm always amazed then simple things that we do in the studio, like slipping boards or book matching, that to us are just not that big of a deal anymore. They really, I mean, in a very simple way, it's actually quite profound, I think. Ellsworth Kelly is another artist, more known as a painter, but he did this, I stumbled upon at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts a couple of years ago, this exhibition of his. I had no idea he had even made these wooden sculptures, and they were very figurative, these planks, but he just did simple things like cut the end off a board and slip it back on itself, and it was a really simple gesture, but actually quite profound and got me thinking about wood again in a different way. And then here's another David Nash piece that's actually very much like the bandsaw box process, where you're cutting things out, cutting things apart, putting it back together. And then this is a Swiss artist, Vincent Kohler, and this actually isn't wood. This piece is actually polystyrene and resin. But again, that thinking conceptually really about the material of wood and the grain. And okay, and then so after the bandsaw box, then they do this little. You can barely see, but that is a little finger jointed box. So it's just based on a little like colonial candle box. These are about 10 inches long and 5 inches wide, 4.5 inches deep. But this is where they all get to make their box from lumber from oak trees that were once growing on campus. So this is where that whole harvest to use and the wood miser idea. So also they learn that this wood was milled years ago because it needs the drying time. So also that process of the slower technology of doing stuff today in preparation for tomorrow. So they don't get to, right? Other students milled up this wood, and that's learning to appreciate the lack of immediacy, that it's not, because everything is so immediate for us now today, but learning to slow down and appreciate that we're going to mill something up today that we're not going to get to use, but students a couple of years from now will get to use. Just a few examples of those. And then I also try to incorporate this then into assignments with the advanced class. And this is, any of you who were at the conference a couple years ago in Maine will remember Francis Cape's amazing installation of his utopian benches. And I was really I've always wanted to do a bench project with students, but I was really taken with that installation. And then, is anyone here, did anyone in the room participate in the conversation on these benches at the main conference with Brother Arnold? No, who was one of the last remaining Shakers. And so if you don't know about this Utopian Bench project that Francis Cape did, look it up. Go to his website and look it up. It's really a fascinating project that he did. But this was installed 2 years ago at the Maine Furniture Society conference, and he invited Brother Arnold, who was one of the last 3 Shakers, to come sit with us on the benches and have a conversation. And I was struck by how different the room felt socially, because instead of sitting on chairs like you all are, right, with a back and each person on their individual seat, we were sharing benches with each other. There were no backs to the benches, so people were straddling, or we just kind of automatically created sort of a circle around whoever was talking. It was a very different feel. And I realized that, we all know this, and we think about the fact that, furniture does do something, and it can dictate social engagement. Some people make work that's conceptually based on these ideas. So I developed an assignment. Basically, the whole semester revolved around this idea of the benches So I showed Francis Cape's work. I showed a lot of other furniture makers or artists who have used bench. And then we talked about seating and the difference between sitting in a chair individually and sharing a bench with people. Talked about design, like what it does to have a bench without a back, so that people can sit whichever way they want or straddle. And then my original idea was to have the class collaboratively build benches that would then be used in meetings, because what Francis did was these benches went around the country and they actually were used in different communities for meetings of different sorts. So I wanted to have a certain meeting that was happening on campus with our new president. So I was using the opportunity of IUP having a brand new president, and he, from what I could tell, he seemed to be very interested in community, and he is, and getting people's feedback and increasing the dialogue. So, and the dean really liked the idea, and he and the president liked the idea. That part of it never came to fruition. So the benches got built, and we now have them, some of them in the art department. They didn't get used in meetings with the president, but I still hope to be able to do something like that someday. But it did start a conversation among the students, and I was amazed at where the students took this and their ideas, and they designed and then built benches collaboratively. So we were talking about community and collaboration and sharing, and then the assignment was collaborative in that they were designing and building benches together. And we also, together we decided on the parameters for the benches, like what materials would be able to be used. They were all built out of oak. We knew that we were going to build them out of oak from campus. That was one of the first parameters. But then other design parameters we talked about collectively. This is one of the benches, really simple but nice, quite elegant form. And then here's just an example of one of the others. And the intention was actually to have one more completely closed form to nest underneath that second bench, but they ran out of time for that. And I knew, because I knew if these benches were displayed, they would look very much like Francis's installation. I actually called Francis up and had a conversation with him and made sure that he was okay with my using that idea for a class project. I felt like I felt like the responsible thing to do would be to confer with him about that. And of course he was excited and gave his blessing. So now we move into the most recent thing that's happened, which is new construction on campus. So what you're looking at is the site of our new Crimson Cafe, which is still under construction right now. So that was a summer picture. This was the fall, and that's what it looks like now, or what it looked like before they started the building. So we got several trees from that. And this was one of my favorite green spaces on campus. So this was really sad to me, and this is a street view basically looking at the campus. And now that is the new humanities building is going up, packed in there. And ironically, so now you're looking out to the street, right? There was this beautiful little row of fruit trees. And ironically, there's this plaque about green space there, right? Which I thought was kind of funny. But so here are those trees coming down. And I learned something in this process. The day that these trees came down, one of the state engineers was on campus to make sure everything was happening. Okay, and initially he was a little anxious about my picture taking, and wondering what that was about. And as soon as I explained that, you know, I was one of the professors in the art department, Wood Center, we were going to end up getting these trees and milling them, he was okay. But, you know, he didn't know that I wasn't, right, you know, part of some protest against cutting the trees down and that sort of thing. But what I did find out from him is that there are a lot of different ways to take trees down. And if you want to take trees down to use the lumber, there's a way to do that to avoid the tearing that happens here, because I didn't realize, I mean, it makes sense now, but that tearing actually damages the grain for quite a ways up, and also the hitting of hitting the ground can damage the grain. So, you know, and the guys that were hired by the campus to take these down were not trained to take trees down to be used for lumber, right? They're the tree monkey guys who are just get the tree out, and normally they would just chip these up. So there are all these different levels of things to understand about these things. And I mean, I don't think it's probably ever possible for us to end up getting trees taken down in the manner that would make sure no damage to any grain happened, right? Because the campus's bottom line is something very different from using the trees for lumber. I mean, they're happy that they get used for that. But there are all these different levels and layers to these processes. And again, going back to that, figuring out who to make friends with to get these things done. What was that?
Is it a trick to cut it down so that it's good lumber in one sentence? I mean, or is it pretty complicated? To not do it that way.
It's more complicated and it takes more time, I think, right? And I think you have to come in and cut, I don't know, he explained it to me and I can't remember exactly, but yeah, so you try to avoid that tearing of the fibers. Again, everyone has a different interest in what's going on, and just like any kind of collaboration, I think it's about understanding where someone else is coming from, what's important to them. So the guy who manages grounds, he's very happy. He doesn't like these trees to come down. He's very happy for us to at least be able to use the lumber. I had a nice conversation with him about, they tend to take these trees down at a time when they can avoid as much publicity as possible. Like basically, he said, BA, people don't like trees to come down. So the community doesn't want to hear about trees coming down. So even like the trees from the emerald ash that were damaged from the emerald ash borer, the university didn't want the community or the public getting any wind. They try to just sneak in there, get them out, them gone. And to me, I started talking about, well, here's an educational experience, not just for the students in the woodworking program, but for the students across campus and for the community, that there are times when trees do need to come down, and we can do something responsible and educational with that. So my goal is to try to get that bottom line shifted as much as possible to one of education. So maybe it takes the facilities people more manpower, a little more time to make an educational opportunity out of it. But to me, that's worth it. But it's convincing other people that it's worth that. And now pretty much everyone's on board for getting the lumber to us to mill up. But it's I knew that the wood miser had been in the oak grove because I saw that picture of I saw a picture of it milling up wood on site in the oak grove. But when I asked about that, when I found out that they were going to take the ash trees down, I got a phone call from not Tony, the grounds manager who you saw harnessing Chris up and who cleaned up the whole site for us, but from his boss. I got a phone call, and Doug actually laughed at me on the phone and just said, yeah, there's no way you're bringing the wood miser into the oak grove. He just retired. So now I have a new friend to make, right? And I'll get strategic about how I present this idea. But also that idea of education and communication and being really informed. We actually, last fall, intercepted, and I can't remember how we got wind of this, I think through one of the students who had taken my intro class who photographed for the student newspaper. She got wind of an article that someone was writing for the student newspaper that claimed that we went around and chose the trees that we wanted cut to make furniture out of, right? So that would not have been, so fortunately we intercepted that article and actually then sat down with the student. I don't know where this information is coming from. That's not actually, what we do. But so, yeah, I mentioned this, but the other great thing about having the wood miser and getting the, people get excited about this stuff. Not just woodworkers, but anyone gets excited about seeing a big machine like that cut up logs into lumber. But it also helps us. The woodworking area is one of the areas in the art department, as you can imagine, that tends to draw students from other departments. We get a lot of students from interior design, but we also get a lot of students. IUP has one of the largest criminology departments in the country. So Eddie is actually one of the criminology students who took the woodworking class and then became an art minor just so he could keep taking woodworking classes. We also have a safety science program on campus, and those students are now starting to come in and take the woodworking classes too. So I did just want to thank Chris Weiland, who taught from 78 to 2009, because he has been incredibly helpful to me, and he is the one who actually came up with the idea and instigated this whole HarvestToUse program. Steve Lohr, who is the director of the Wood Center, Center for Turning and Furniture Design, which will soon be changed. Steve actually teaches 3D design, and this year we had our first turning class taught by Steve. So that will become a regular thing. Our shop technician, Joe, and then the students, and you can't see here what's happening, but Caesar actually has picked up some bark shavings and is imitating Zeke's mustache. Anyway, and the students are what do it for me. I wouldn't keep teaching. It's teaching is a very different job. Now that I'm in it, it's even different from what I did not apply for all this emailing. It's not the job that I applied for. But there's a lot more involved in teaching. It seems like it gets more and more every day as budgets are cut and staff is cut, that there's so much more that you end up having to do that you didn't realize would necessarily be part of a university teaching job. But these students, these guys are why I do it, because it's just, there's nothing to me more rewarding than having a young woman come into an intro woodworking class who's never spent time in a wood shop, who's absolutely terrified, or a young man, but often, especially at the intro level in undergrad, the majority of students are young women, actually, but there's nothing more rewarding to me than empowering students like that who come in terrified and then see them through, to the end of the semester where they're standing there ripping boards on the table saw confidently on their own. It's a really cool thing. So.